Hello, thank you for being in a new video. This time I have the Nubia flip in my hands and we review on this foldable. Let's get started. This device seeks to compete in a segment that is very little saturated. It is a mid-range segment of foldables. I could only remember the Motorola Razr 40, but it is still not so common for many brands to launch a mid-range foldable, although evidently foldables from past years are dropping in price as time goes by as well, so you might be able to find a Galaxy Z Flip 4 also close to this price. But speaking of price, Nubia has taken a bit of a strange strategy in its arrival in Mexico, since it arrives hand in hand with Telcel at a high price and with Mercado Libre at a tighter price. So in Telcel you can find it at a price of 13,999 pesos, more or less, a price that will definitely put it to compete with other rivals of much more weight. But on Mercado Libre it is priced at 9,999 pesos, which is approximately $550. That is a much more competitive and more attractive price. So if you are interested, I do not recommend buying it on Telcel because it will be more expensive and will bring the second SIM tray locked. But how about you join me to know it point by point so you can see a little more details about it. I'm going to analyze it at the Amazon and Mercado Libre price because I consider it to be a more competitive price. I'm already warning you that it would not be advisable to buy it at Telcel's price. So let's get to know it. Let's start by showing you its design. In this aspect, it is definitely a super attractive device. The simple fact of being a foldable gives it more capabilities. For example, to transport it, it will obviously use less space. Plus, you could just leave it on a table and without the need for a special tripod, you could take pictures and the like. So, the fact that it's a foldable is definitely an attraction. And definitely in this price range, there are virtually no folding ones. This external cover is very nice. It has a very nice brushed finish, both to the eye and to the touch. It has some level of texture, but at the same time it gives this matte finish that's super fine. The frames and the buttons have an aluminum alloy with zirconium sandblasting process. That's the specific processing that they've done to it, and it definitely feels great in the hand as well. It's a pretty premium design in terms of materials and feel to the touch. On the right side, we'll find the power button with a red hue along with the volume buttons. On the left side is the tray where we can place nano SIM cards, although as I said, if you buy it with Telcel, the second tray will be blocked. On the bottom we find the main speaker, plus a USB-C port and a microphone. And in the half that's left on the top, we'll find another microphone. The hinge has the name of the brand, giving a very nice finish. And speaking of the hinge, it has passed the test of over 200,000 folds and unfolds. So it has a good level of durability according to the tests reported by the manufacturer. In this case, it is a considerably good hinge. It's smooth, it's not that stiff when opening. But note that if you need a considerably wide angle before the device can stay fixed. If you try to leave it at these closed angles, you will notice that the device is not able to stay fixed. But after that, it can stay at any inclination you wish. This can be very useful when using the camera and this device with its integrated base. And with respect to the maximum aperture angle, it doesn't achieve anything too exaggerated either. But it definitely has enough to be considered a good folding device and a good hinge design, especially considering that it doesn't have a marked gap in this area of the fold. It does get to have a small and very slight gap, but it's really not a big deal. So considering that we're talking about a mid-range foldable, I found the hinge design to be very good. When the device is open, it's 7mm thick, and when closed, it goes up to 15mm. And just talking about resistance, this device does not integrate Gorilla Glass, which would be very nice because these covers could break relatively easily. Even the area of the camera module that is combined with the external display could fracture in a fall and does not offer some level of resistance in this section. In fact, it doesn't have any level of water resistance either, but obviously that can be forgiven considering it's a mid-range folding device. Consider that even many high-end foldables don't have water resistance, and in this case I have the gold color edition, although there is also a black option. And on the inside, note that the bezels are a bit sharper compared to regular smartphones, but it still has a good use of this section. The fold area does become distinguishable, especially when you have the screen off. Obviously, it's not a foldable from which we can demand a better treatment in this fold area, but believe me, it's a lot like, for example, what Samsung offers you with the Z Flip 5 or the Z Flip 4, so it's no big deal. I really like the design. Let's talk about the external display. It's 1.43 inches in diameter. As you can see, it's a completely round screen that offers us a resolution of 466 pixels. In this case, we are talking about an OLED panel, so we find here a very good level of detail. It will still have very saturated and intense colors. In a moment, I will tell you about all its features, but speaking specifically of the screen, what I personally think is lacking is the brightness, since in outdoor situations the screen does not get to be seen with such intensity, which is understandable considering again that we are talking about a mid-range foldable. However, in the internal display does not make any kind of sacrifice. We are in front of a panel of excellent quality. 6.9 inches in its diagonal, 21.1:9 ratio, so we could say that it is a wider screen than normal when you are holding the device horizontally. Its resolution is Full HD+. To be very precise, it is 2790 by 1188 pixels, which together with this size gives us a density of 440 pixels per inch, which I insist is a very good level of detail for viewing this multimedia content or even for texts with very small or very detailed typography. It is an OLED panel that is going to offer us good color saturation, very good contrast, and also good viewing angles. Although in this case, having a protective plastic in this area of the folding screen, it can produce a little more reflections than we would like, but overall it is a screen that really does meet a very good quality. There is no specific information regarding the maximum peak brightness, but it does support HDR content. Obviously, we are also going to have a low brightness, considerably low. In fact, in the accessibility options, there is the option of extra dimming, with which you could further lower the brightness of the screen for a super comfortable use at night. Obviously, it also integrates a reading mode that can serve to have the phone in grayscale and have a much more comfortable reading. In addition, we will find the traditional night mode of several smartphones with adjustment of different intensities and also has different color calibrations. You can have colors a little more saturated or a little more natural colors depending on your taste, plus a wheel to select the specific color temperature you want to display. By the way, the screen is 120 Hz, so it can show you quite smooth and fluid movements when navigating the system and even in some games. In the sound section, we will find the main speaker inside the frame and a secondary speaker in the earpiece area for calls. Together, they achieve a really very powerful sound. It stands out a lot at the highest volume, and the main speaker has a good presence of bass frequencies. Although the secondary speaker only comes to complement the stereo experience and does not have so much quality, but I really like the sound considering that we are talking about a low-cost foldable. Let's listen to a small test, but remember that it's not the same to listen to it live. In the software, we will find a good experience as it integrates DTS:X ultrasound, i.e. an alternative to Dolby Atmos, so that it will give us preferences with different presets for the sound we want to have. It even gives us access to a 10-band graphic equalizer without the need to have headphones connected. It also integrates several stereo sound profiles depending on the type of amplitude you want with these speakers, so I really like the experience. Although consider that it doesn't have a headphone jack, that's something that's going to be pretty common on foldables, but in case it was a must-have for you, you should know that. You'll need to use headphones through the USB-C port or wireless headphones. And in the case of using wireless headphones, note that it supports the aptX codec and actually lets you access codec preferences to modify various parameters of the audio resolution that you will receive wirelessly. It also supports aptX adaptive and also includes support for the LDAC codec, which is much more advanced for very high quality headphones. So the audio experience really is very good in terms of the speakers and the headphone experience. Integrate two microphones, let's listen to a test. Este audio ha sido captado con los micrófonos integrados del Nubia Flip 5G en un ambiente donde se oye una ligera lluvia al fondo. For picking up vocals, it's pretty good. Next, we will see a video recorded with this device in a very noisy environment. This confirms that this device is not recommended for recording at concerts, as it can lose a lot of definition in these environments where the volume is very loud. The front camera is 16 megapixels with f2.5 aperture and fixed focus. The device does not integrate any gesture to open the camera with speed, which I definitely think could be improved. In this case, the device shows good enough agility when taking these types of pictures. Also note that it integrates a single slider for beauty mode without too many parameters. And at the top it also has a button where we can load presets of different colors that we can preview in real time. Obviously, being a foldable comes very well adapted because it notes that at the time of folding the device will change and adapt the interface so that you can perfectly put the device on the table, and you can take pictures very easily by simply showing the palm of your hand. But not only that, you also notice that it integrates a special button in the top left corner that allows you to show the preview on the back, and that way you can take a picture more easily. So in this sense, it does get to take advantage of the benefits of a foldable. This front camera is going to give us nice results, although remember that you can also take selfies with the rear system, which would be more advisable. But even so, I think the front camera is acceptable. Remember that we are talking about a kind of mid-range foldable. It has fixed focus, but even if you have your arms stretched out, you come out well focused and with good level of detail. So for group shots, people are going to be in focus. But the detail here is that the behavior when there is not much illumination can be much easier. Look at the difference now taking the picture with the rear system. We definitely gain much more definition. Remember also that if you are very close or you want to capture a specific detail of your face, you are going to be out of focus. But I insist, if you take pictures with the rear system, you will definitely get a much higher level of detail. You gain a lot of detail. The natural blur effect that is generated is also very nice. So I definitely recommend taking selfies with the rear system. Also, this rear system would allow you to have the autofocus so you could focus on much closer details of your face. In backlit scenes, the preview doesn't look optimized, but the result is balanced in highlights and shadows. Although the color honestly looks very inaccurate, in this case with the front camera. But if you try to take a backlit picture with the rear system, the result is much better in terms of color. Although curiously, in this case, the focus was adjusted for the most illuminated area, so the face that was in shadow came out of focus. So maybe in backlight it is not so advisable to take selfies with the rear system. Indoors, this front camera performs well in terms of color capture, but since it doesn't have so much light, the result could come out blurry. So again, it is advisable to use the rear system and see how the photo will come out much better defined. And it has good color and good contrast, although there is a bit of grain present in the darker areas, but nothing serious. At night, it's going to do very similar behavior to what we were seeing indoors. That is, it doesn't have as much detail. Even with the rear photographic system, it can suffer at night to define the details well. And in very complicated backlit night scenes, it does an excellent job balancing lights and shadows. But on the downside, it loses a lot of detail. So even though the photo is 16 megapixels, it actually looks like a 4 megapixel photo. But I insist, if you are in a well-lit environment, the result I think will be good enough. Although the portraits with the front camera at night I didn't like. And in the daytime you will have a good result only if you don't have an object nearby, since in this case it is not able to keep the objects in focus but only the body parts. And therefore the result can look very strange if you are close to some object, but if you don't have any object nearby, I think it gives a good result. And even though it also allows you to take portrait pictures with the external system taking advantage of the external screen, actually the result is still as bad. Regarding the cameras of the rear photographic system, we will find the main 26mm with a 50 megapixel sensor, f-aperture 1.8 and autofocus, although it does not have optical stabilization. On the other hand, the second camera considers the as a decoration camera. It is for depth capture of 2 megapixels, nothing more. It is very clear that in this case the photographic module is very simple. We would have loved to see an ultra-wide camera available, although I come to understand it somehow because it is a mid-range foldable. And again, in this case, it will take advantage of being a foldable by adapting its interface when you have the device in this mode. In fact, it will also allow you to select this button so that the person on the other side will also be able to see how it's coming up on the camera at the same time, and that's definitely something that normal devices can't do. What it doesn't allow us to do is to move the preview to the half that's left at the bottom, which could become useful for taking pictures looking up. In this case, the preview remains exclusively in the upper half. The preview, as every device, goes with a little delay, and in this case, capturing the picture looking through the cell phone. I think it has a little delay before you can capture the result. It's not that noticeable a delay, but I wouldn't consider that you can capture the exact moment with this cell phone. It also has a burst available, although it takes practically a second to start. But note that it is a virtually unlimited burst of pictures. So that aspect could be useful for capturing the exact moment, as long as you start the burst before the moment you want to capture happens. Notice that on the camera it shows us two focal length settings, 26 and 50 millimeters. If you touch the screen, you can obviously adjust the exposure and focus. And in this part, you can also enable color filters, in addition to the artificial intelligence that by default is disabled. And so we're going to try it out. But if you want more parameters, you can enter the expert mode, where is available also the shutter speed that can go up to 50 seconds. You could also have here the type of metering. It can be average, centered or spot. And there is also the option to move the white balance. Also the ISO, which can go up to 25,600, something that's unusual on smartphones. And you can also move the focus, the compensation, and finally activate an interval photography. Also note that you can take pictures in RAW, so in this aspect the photographic experience can be very attractive, especially considering that professional photography with long exposures usually requires a tripod, and in this case you could very well leave the device on a stand or a table and take this kind of more advanced pictures. And regarding the intelligent detection, notice that it is able to scan QR codes directly from the main camera interface. So in that sense, the experience is super good. And even though from the main interface it doesn't integrate automatic document recognition, it does have a special mode through which you can initiate this document scanning. It has 3 different color processing settings. The most recommended is the one called Enhanced. And with this, the device will automatically do the cropping of this document, and it will also optimize the colors and contrast to make it look like a much more professional scanner. Although it doesn't allow you to keep adding more sheets to the same document, the device integrates a 50 megapixel mode with which you can have a good level of detail, although it does not seem to me that it is used to 100%. I think the device could still have a more optimized algorithm to have higher details. In automatic mode, it lets you take pictures of 12.5 megapixels, so you have a good level of detail. In fact, it is curious that it looks very similar to the detail that the 50 megapixel mode would give you. That's why I insist that the 50 megapixel mode is not that advanced. And with this main camera, you notice that if there is chromatic aberration present in some areas of the photograph. So it doesn't seem to be that advanced a camera. And even though the camera interface suggests us the 50mm setting as if it were optical quality, actually in this case the picture doesn't look that good at the 50mm zoom setting. Indoors, the result will be positive. Fortunately, it manages to significantly reduce noise in darker areas. It maintains good contrast and good saturation, although the level of detail is the one that starts to fall a little short, confirming that it is not a top-of-the-range device. In light backlight scenarios, we observe that the device behaves well in the preview, and it also gives us a good result. Maybe the shadow area is a bit darker than we would like. But actually the result is positive taking this kind of pictures. And interestingly, in the evenings you see excellent work with this camera. Notice that it balances the more exposed areas very well. Also the dark areas, it manages to illuminate them in a good way, even giving a good color saturation. In fact, when you use the night mode, there is not so much difference. So with the automatic mode, you already have an excellent quality. With the 2x zoom setting, there is a big difference between auto mode and night mode. So there are scenarios where it becomes more useful. But note that in super dark scenes where there are no nearby light sources, the result is quite impressive in terms of the amount of light it manages to collect, although obviously there's not as much definition and there are lots and lots of artifacts throughout the entire photograph. But I insist it was a super dark scene. Overall, it's a device that performs well even at night, as long as you have a light source nearby. I already anticipated you that from the 2x zoom we do not see a very attractive quality. And therefore, despite the fact that the maximum zoom is 10x, in reality there is not much detail. And for macro photography we are going to have a moderately good result, since by the characteristics of the lens and the sensor you cannot get so close to the objects. But it does generate a very nice completely natural blur effect, but the foreground focus is not so uniform. Still, I think you could achieve considerably good results. If the 2x zoom were of higher quality, it would be a much more attractive result. But note that when using 2x zoom, the result looks much simpler in terms of level of detail. That's why I think macro photography on this device is not able to stand out. Remember that it also has panorama mode, so while it does not have ultra-wide camera, at least through this mode if you can get to have wide pictures. And in fact the panorama mode retains a very high resolution. And that's nice, unlike other devices that when using panorama mode they lower the resolution. And finally, for portrait photography, the result seems to me positive in a sense. For example, if it gets to detect the foreground to keep it in focus, even if they are objects. Although it does not have such a high level of accuracy, but I think the detection is fine. The only thing I find a bit exaggerated is the level of blur it achieves, considering that in this case it is simulating an aperture f by default. But that's something you can change when you take your picture, so portraits I think come out well without it becoming its specialty. I would love it if it allowed us to have a telephoto perspective, taking advantage of its 50 megapixel sensor. But it doesn't take advantage of the zoom in automatic mode, much less will it take advantage of it in portrait mode. For video recording, it does support 4K as maximum resolution, which is very positive in a device of this price. And considering that it is a foldable, it obviously gains much more prominence, although the front camera can only record video in full HD. When recording video, remember that in a foldable, generally it stands out that you could hold it as if it were a handycam and have your viewfinder on this half of the screen. So also for video recording, you can take advantage of the experience of having a foldable. And again, just like in photography, you could enable the preview on the external display, so that the person on this side can also see how it's appearing. And interestingly enough, within the expert mode, video recording is also available, so even while you're recording, you could move different parameters like white balance and so on. And in the automatic recording interface, notice that you have a button to take pictures, another button to pause or resume the content, another button to turn on the flashlight, and of course you have different levels of intensity on the flashlight, and then you have the button to show the content on the external display. And also while you're recording you could turn it off. The only thing you can't do is rotate to the front camera without the need to stop your video recording, and it also doesn't have some quick zoom shortcuts. Video recording will be simple, even though it supports video in 4K, which is very positive. As I told you at the time of analyzing the photograph, this lens does not seem to have a treatment, very advanced treatment of light. So if there are areas where a little chromatic aberration is revealed, even the white balance, it can be altering during your video recording. There are also jumps, a little bit aggressive in the exposure, which for the price point of this device, we would expect a higher quality recording. Indoors, fortunately, it seems to control noise in a good way. Although the colors again, they look a little inaccurate, and again some jumps are distinguishable, a bit aggressive in the exposure. Obviously it's getting a bit fussy, but being a folding device, one would expect a more advanced camera. Fortunately though, recording against the backlight it performs well. It doesn't seem to try to over-illuminate the face, as in other devices, that cause the illuminated areas come out very burned. In this case, it is a well-balanced video in highlights and shadows, although the backlighting was not so aggressive in this case, but the result, I insist that it is pleasant. And in the evenings, the video recording, it's going to have a lot more noise present, confirming to us that it's a simple camera. Also, the focus is starting to have some problems. And in the darker areas, it's not able to collect a lot of information. So it's a camera, completely from a mid-range device, even though we're talking about a foldable. Shooting video while you're walking or running, it will be a bad idea if you have this stable mode, because definitely the result is somewhat unpleasant, but fortunately turning on the higher stabilization mode if you control the movements well, although it seems to generate some vibrations, which are still not so nice, but definitely the result. It is not as bad as the one you saw before this recording. The focus you'll also doesn't respond as fast. It seems to have problems, especially when focusing on small objects. Even on fast movements, the focus seems to freeze a bit. Therefore, it is very clear that it is a device that should improve much better video recording if it wants to compete in a better way. In this case, it does not incorporate a portrait recording mode and the fast camera mode. Fortunately, it can be in 4K, but it goes to a very low bit rate, so if you pause the content, at some point you'll notice that it looks with a super low level of detail, plus the adjustment is from 15x, which can be very fast for recording people, but you can go up to 1800x with what you could record, scenery or landscapes much more attractive. But if you need to have the device fixed, and in this case also the focus, notice that he struggled in this time-lapse, and in this case, it offers two slow motion modes, Full HD at 120 frames per second, which looks slow enough, though again at a low bit rate, which causes low level of detail, and the other mode can reach 240 frames per second, in this case in HD, so it's a simple slow motion, but at least it is available. The front camera. Just like we saw in the picture, it has simple colors in this video recording. In addition, it does not integrate stabilization, and that produces that the result is somewhat unpleasant, considering that it is applying a significant crop in the camera. And you don't see such a big picture. Notice that also in backlight, it doesn't perform as well since it gets to overexpose the most illuminated areas from the back. And I want you to observe the difference between a video recorded with this front camera, which has no stabilization, and it seems to exaggerate a little bit in its sharpness, and now the result that you would have recording with the rear system, which definitely shows you much better quality, a little bit more stabilization, and more contrast and more accurate colors. So the best thing to do would be to shoot with the rear system, although the screen doesn't have as much brightness, so it might be a bit tricky. Indoors again, we notice the same thing, more graininess and poor color accuracy, recording with the front camera, but recording you with the rear camera, it improves the contrast, although indoors we already saw that this camera, it does not stand out too much, but it does offer more quality than the front camera. And at night, again the same. Recording you with the front camera, you will see more presence of grain and little contrast in these scenarios. The colors also look poorly defined due to the large amount of grain present. And if you record yourself with the rear system, you gain much more contrast. The dark areas look really dark, and they don't look as pale, like we saw with the front camera. So it's much more advisable to record using this rear camera system. And it should be noted that the front camera, it does not have a fast camera mode, neither slow motion nor dual recording. On the software, the experience will be straightforward. It comes with Android 13 and my OS 13. Definitely that for being a 2024 device, we would like it to arrive with Android 14. Also in this case, the manufacturer does not offer any clear update policy. Therefore, we hope that it will be updated to future versions of Android, but we have no certainty. Remember that ZTE's system comes with little customization in terms of added features. Something I like is that the system lists if you can slide them down to reach the first item more easily. In the customization section, note that we will find only 2 themes available. There is not much more to show here. It has a feature called Super Lock, which will be a kind of magazine that can keep changing your wallpaper on multiple occasions. Personally, I don't really like this kind of features. But at least in this case, it shows only landscapes and does not show strange things like other devices we have tested with similar features. It also has the always-on mode, although being a foldable device, generally when you're not using it, sure you're going to have it with the screen closed. So it is not as useful as we would like, but it is available in case you want to have this special cover. Note that it has different styles that you can use, some with animated dials, some with digital clocks, some with analog clocks, and you can even put some custom phrases. It also allows you to modify the speed of the animations, which can be useful if you want to have a smoother experience. Regarding the external display, note that there are several things you can modify. For starters, you can modify the wallpaper with a tremendous list of options available. This is a very positive thing because at the customization level you have several options, including some mascots that might just brighten up your day a bit. It also has some animated backgrounds so that you have different visual effects or illustration effects and different types of graphics. It really has a lot of variety for you to choose the background you like the most. You can also customize the always-on cover of the external display, which is very useful to know the current time status at a glance. Taking advantage of the round design, you could place an analog clock, or you could also have a fully customized digital clock in terms of color. And on this external display, you could also manage the additional tools that are available. It's not too many tools, nor does it let you add more tools from other apps or something similar. But at least you can interact with your device in some scenarios using this screen. For example, you can access the camera and notice that by swiping from top to bottom, you can switch between different modes. Then the level of interaction is sufficient, and to go backwards, you have to swipe from left to right. We will also find a quick access to a music player widget compatible with any other music player you have installed. You also have a quick look at the weather, a quick look at the calendar and your events. And finally, an access to the pedometer to see the steps you are taking and the timer to start it with great speed, plus the voice recorder. But for example, you could not start the voice assistant when the screen is off, nor could you select that you want to turn on the flashlight or other things. On this external screen, you can also access notifications by swiping from top to bottom. And right now I don't have any notifications, and in this case, when you get a message, notice that you can quickly give a simple glance at the notification, but you can't interact with it. Even when multiple notifications come in from the same user, you'll only see the most recent notification. So you can't see the whole conversation history, for example, if your friend sends you a sentence for each message. Note that you can receive emojis. So that's nice. I wish you could reply with voice dictation, considering we are talking about a smartphone. But in this case, the experience interacting with notifications on the external display is quite simple, and you can only read the most recent notification. Although if you receive notifications from multiple apps, you can obviously see the list of the different apps, but they won't be grouped together or anything more advanced. Being such a tall device, it can be a bit awkward to use it with one hand, so in this case it also integrates an option to shrink the screen size, and you can actually resize this mini screen. So it's very well implemented. Specifically talking about the keyboard, I have to tell you that the experience is a little bit awkward due again to the long layout that this device has. You're going to have to get used to the keyboard being a little bit lower, or depending on your keyboard, you could try to resize it to make it a little bit more comfortable to type on. But by default, the keyboard gets to be a little uncomfortable. It also has the floating ball where you can have other navigation settings at your fingertips and some other basic gestures to control the device. As always with ZTE, I like to highlight the gesture to shake the device when turning on the flashlight on the lock screen. But let me see if it is compatible with the external display. As you notice, it is not possible to turn on the flashlight if you have the device folded. By the way, in this case, you can't open apps in a floating window mode, but you can enable split screen mode to show two apps at the same time. If you exit them, note that they will remain linked in the recent apps list as well. And as for adapting apps for a foldable device, you'll be entirely up to the developers. In the case, for example, of YouTube, it is perfectly well adapted to also open the controls if you are a premium user in the lower half, and in the upper half keep the video playback. But this can vary depending on the different applications. In the case of ZTE, it has a little optimization in the system, so few applications will get to take full advantage of this feature of the foldable device, but at least the camera, as you saw a moment ago, yes, it is optimized. And by the way, the device isn't as optimized to take advantage of the Aptic engine and give you feedback when using the system in a very good way. Despite the fact that it has an X-axis optical engine, you're not going to feel any feedback when the lists come together or when you deactivate or activate certain switches. It only gives feedback when you go backwards and on a few other simple gestures, but it's definitely a bit underutilized. Like many folding phones, it integrates a side fingerprint reader. Simply place and remove your finger for fast unlocking. You can register up to 5 different fingerprints, and you can also select whether the button needs to be pressed before unlocking. It has a quick launch option with which you can map some fingerprints to directly open an app when you unlock using that fingerprint, so it could be a shortcut to quickly open the camera. It also integrates facial unlock, but obviously it's very simple, only in 2 dimensions, so I don't recommend you to use it. The device integrates Google Smart Lock, so it stays unlocked in secure environments or trusted places where you set it. And another thing it brings from Google is its password manager, so you can fill in passwords automatically, but note that in this case it doesn't check first if it's you before filling in. It also includes an application called My Vault, where you can store your files or applications and even passwords, although these passwords will not be automatically filled in the forms. But at least it does give you this level of privacy. Although it does not integrate child mode, nor does it integrate any private VPN, nor a collaboration with any antivirus, but depends on Google Play Protect. The battery is 4310 milliamps. It is always usually a bit of a complex issue with foldables, as there is little room, and this is no exception. It is a relatively small battery. Running the drainer in the foreground, the device reached 3 hours, although there came a point where the device heated up close to 49 degrees Celsius and shut down this app to take care of the battery. So definitely, if you want to give a very rough and very heavy use with very complicated jobs to the processor, it is not going to give you the expected performance. And I also did another test by having YouTube videos in the foreground while we had the drainer in the background. Notice that although the drainer consumed a high percentage of battery, in this case it practically reached 5 hours, although the drainer that was in the background was constantly closing it, so it had to be opening it again. In practical life, this means that the device will have a good autonomy if you are not giving it an intense use, but it could also cause that some applications are not sending you notifications or something similar due to its aggressive power management. But if any app is very important to you, you could go to this section and select what you want to always keep allowed to run in the background. Note that it also integrates a standard saver mode, which can be very useful for the everyday day, but it does not integrate an ultra saver mode. The integrated charger in the box is 33 watts. It will offer us a fast charge that is considerably good. In my test, with 15 minutes I recovered 39% of the energy, something that is very remarkable considering that it is a foldable. In 30 minutes I recovered 67% and the full charge was completed in 53 minutes. Obviously, being a mid-range foldable, it will not integrate wireless charging nor reversible wireless charging. And through software it does not have any battery care option either. In connectivity, this device can reach 5G networks, something that is definitely positive. However, in this case, it doesn't offer the eSIM option, so if you're on the go, you'll miss that option. It also doesn't have an option to select which applications will be able to connect to the internet with our mobile data. It only has a data saving mode, and you can select which applications will not apply in this data saving mode. So, it doesn't do us much good to control our spending. So, it also supports Wi-Fi 6, so it has good download speeds if your provider and router support it, but it integrates Bluetooth 5.1, so it doesn't have as much stability connected to accessories as more modern devices. It also doesn't integrate NFC, so you can't make mobile payments or link to accessories by reaching behind your back, and it obviously won't have FM radio either, although that's traditional for devices at this price point. If it is capable of projecting its screen wirelessly, though only in a mirrored format, it obviously has Android Auto, and it also has a good amount of sensors including accelerometer, geomagnetic field, orientation, gyroscope, and even a completely physical proximity sensor that has no drawbacks. So in this aspect, all good. In the ecosystem, Nubia is still very weak. Although it has out there some tablets or headsets, they do not really offer advanced interaction with respect to their mobile devices. It depends entirely on Google, so it has the same ecosystem as any other Android device, using technologies like QuickShare or Google FastPay. And it also depends on Google for cloud storage and also for controlling home devices, so we could say that it is very dependent on Google still. For performance, note that this device integrates the Snapdragon 7 Gen 1 as its processor. It is a considerably good chip, although it is not so modern anymore. But there are few devices these days that use this processor. It is accompanied by 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. You simply have to consider that because it is a foldable, it has little room for cooling, and that could play against it in case you are a power-hungry user. It took 3.1 seconds to open each application, so it is definitely not a device that is characterized by being exaggeratedly fast. Although for the vast majority of users, the performance this device is capable of will be high enough. Notice how I can navigate very smoothly within Facebook without the device freezing or stumbling, and in this case, thanks to the fact that it incorporates 8 gigabytes of RAM, it should also allow multiple applications to run at the same time. Especially considering that ZTE's operating system is very basic, so it won't offer too many features and therefore won't have too much RAM consumption either. So definitely the device can give you a smooth experience even with multiple applications open, although it is not that fast at the time of execution. The device does not support storage expansion via microSD cards, so consider that you will be a bit limited in that aspect. But 256 gigabytes is a considerably high capacity. To wrap up our performance test, let's put a video clip to export in LumaFusion. It is a clip with a total duration of 1 minute recorded using this device at 4K resolution. We are not using CapCut because the videos were compressed in that application. It definitely confirms that it's a device that's not going to give you very good video editing capabilities. It's a little slow when exporting. Finally, let's talk about the games. In this case, it does not include any game manager application or additional tools when you are playing, so the experience in that sense is very basic at the software level. In Call of Duty, by default, it gives us very high quality graphics at a high frame rate. In fact, the maximum frame rate per second is also available, which is very good. If you consider the over-the-counter price, it's a totally attractive thing. And being a Snapdragon processor, it is obvious that we will also have several effects available for you to customize your graphics experience to the fullest. In fact, you can use all of them at the same time, and there are also several experimental functions available. Although you should know that normally vertical folders in this format are not recommended for gaming because of the little space they have, and that can cause more heating. In this case, in the initial stage of the game, it had a good enough experience. Its average was 55 frames per second, but recording the screen gets stuck for more moments, so the experience is a bit unstable regarding the frames per second. It's not able to give us a super stable experience, and the heating, as you can see, went up to 45.2 degrees Celsius. In this content, generally, you don't get to heat up devices this much, but talking about foldable ones, generally we always see this level of heating. So the appropriate thing to do perhaps would be to play with a much simpler graphics quality. In the case of Legends, we changed the auto setting to a high setting at 60 frames per second to have a proper test for its price. And again, we're going to have a good experience. It had 59 frames per second on average, although the lowest peak was 36, which is not exaggeratedly low, but we do have to note that this device is not capable of giving you a super stable experience. Notice how its graph doesn't look like a continuous line, but rather you do see several fluctuations. And a curious fact is that being a foldable in this particular case, at the time of folding it, slightly a dialog box will appear that can interrupt your gaming experience. This is something that we had not noticed, nor had it happened to us in other folding devices of similar formats. So it's just a curious fact. That's why I insist that it is not a device very focused on games. In the case of SpongeBob, by default it has the resolution and high quality at 60 frames per second, but curiously the smoothing is not available. But even with the smoothing turned off, we notice that the heating becomes very high again, although the experience was remarkably smooth. In this case, it did not have as many fluctuations as the previous games, but it is clear that it is advisable to play on this device will be to select simpler graphics qualities, since even recording the screen, as I said, it does get to have a little more hindrance. And finally, Enhanced Impact by default is low quality, but for the test we raised it up to high quality at 60 frames per second and very high motion blur. Although in this case its average is not really bad, but in the range of more powerful gaming devices, here the stability again was a bit bad, as it has a lot of fluctuations, although its lowest peak was 21, so it's not a disaster, but as I tell you, it's not a dedicated device for gaming. Although it should also be noted that we put it to somewhat demanding test considering the Telcel price, but even at the Mercado Libre price, the device still has very strong competitors in the normal device segment, so still foldables in this vertical format, I would not recommend it for gaming. As a conclusion, it is a device that could be an interesting alternative for those who want a foldable without having to spend so much. Although I hope that over time it will lower its price even more and become more attractive. As I said at the beginning of the video, at the Telcel price I wouldn't recommend buying it. Through software, I hope it receives some updates to improve the camera, which in theory should be better than the results it gave us. Although again, because it is a foldable, the front camera is not that relevant considering you can use the main system which is of higher quality, but I think it has the same advantages and disadvantages of other foldable devices. While you can take advantage of this format to hold it as a base, the battery and heating can play against you. For now, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can tell us about it, and we'll see you next time.